Wednesday morning, Jameis Winston named the Giants starting quarterback for this Sunday's game, home game against the Green Bay Packers. You heard it and saw it here first on Talking Ball with Pat Leonard on my account over on XP Leonard NYDN and reported via YouTube Shorts, TikTok, Instagram Reels, wherever you are on social media. We brought it to you here first. This is Pat Leonard from the New York Daily News, of course. Welcome to Talking Ball Live with Pat Leonard. Decided to go impromptu here because I showed up to the Giants facility a little bit early for Mike Kafka's first press conference as interim head coach. And it's a new day, kind of, with the Giants. Joe Schoen still the general manager, but a new head coach and a um, the 2-8 team that has 7 games remaining and needs to find a way to play harder, finish, put a competent product on the field. It's really not about the wins and losses right now, though. Two of the key parts of this team that you need to follow at the moment are Jackson Dart and his health, as well as Joe Schoen and his job security. So Jameis Winston named starter for this week. But does it make sense to name him the starter for the rest of the season, potentially? Hear me out. Malik Neighbors is out. Cam Scatterbo is out. The Giants season is going nowhere fast. Also, Dart has been evaluated 4 times for a concussion. In fact, once a month for the past 4 months. August, September, October, November. All 4 months, Dart has been evaluated at least once for a concussion. That's troubling. It's concerning. It's something that, as I was talking to Chris Nowinski of the Concussion Legacy Foundation the other day on the phone about, when a guy goes to the medical tent and he's evaluated, if he is cleared and sent back onto the field, you're putting that player at risk because by nature, hitting your head, subconcussive hits, that is head trauma. So that is head trauma as it is defined. And Jackson Dart is too important to this team, to this franchise, to their future to put him at any kind of risk. Obviously, football is a violent sport, so you put yourself at risk anytime you go out on the field. But Dart was put at risk too often. And of course, in a very troublesome way in that final game of Brian Daboll's tenure against the Chicago Bears when he was not evaluated after clearly lying motionless for a time on the field, not even reaching out for a fumble when the ball popped out, and the Giants did nothing about it until about 5 minutes or more than 5 minutes later of game time, which is more time than that in real time, at the quarter break when they put Russell Wilson in. So, in my mind, I think you're evaluating this from a couple different fronts. There is the what I thought had to be the obvious decision, which was, listen, Russell Wilson can't be the guy anymore after what he showed you in Chicago, on top of what we saw in the first few weeks. And given that Brian Dable never really showed full confidence in Russell Wilson after naming him the starter for the season, between pulling him after 3 weeks, running into the medical tent after Jackson Dart, and then not going for it on 4th and goal from the 1 yard line or the half-yard line, right? So that was, I think, the decision that had to be made was to go to Winston here. But from here on out, this is not the same exact scenario, but look at Jaden Daniels with that elbow injury in Washington. Their season has now gone off the rails. They're going nowhere. That's another team where it just doesn't make sense to put Jaden Daniels at risk. He doesn't really have that many weapons. Terry McLaurin is still out. It's just a roster that is crumbling before their eyes a little bit with injuries and with guys losing a step. And Dan Quinn just had to take over defensive play calling. So if you're the Commanders, are you putting Jaden Daniels back on the field? I don't think you are. I don't think that makes any sense, especially dealing with that injury. So even though Jackson Dart's injury is different, right? It's not as easy to see as the Jaden Daniels elbow injury, right? Walking around on the street, right? There's a brace on someone's elbow versus a guy has a concussion, right? It's still something that people don't fully understand. But we understand it enough to know that the concussion is more serious when it comes to somebody's long term future, their health and livelihood, let alone their earning ability. And so I think that you're also looking at this potentially as, is Jameis Winston not just the starter for this week, but is he going to be the starter for the rest of the season? At the very least, they have 3 games remaining before their bye week, very late bye in early December. So they play this game, they play the Lions, they play the Patriots, and then they have their bye. And then it's Commanders, Vikings, Raiders, Cowboys. So to me, at the very least, you are thinking about at the moment if the best course of action isn't just to start Jameis at least until the bye week. Now, the same thing, and again, this is an impromptu talking ball live with Pat Leonard here on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. It's PL on NFL is the handle on YouTube. That's my handle everywhere on social media, as well as on Twitter. It's P Leonard NYDN. That's where we first broke the news that Jameis Winston was being named the Giants' starting quarterback for this Sunday's home game against the Green Bay Packers. But please support our sponsors too, if you can. We have Boom Chaka Mushroom Super Drink, Hooks, Rubs, and Spices, Salaretta for Men, and My Bookie. Go to all those and support our sponsors. You can also purchase a super chat or a super sticker and have your comment or question elevated to the top of the queue in this chat. I'll get right to it. And please do me a favor while you're in here. Thanks for being here. Hit those like buttons. Hit the thumbs up while we are live. That if you like what you're seeing and hearing and you like this content coming right to your door, then that engagement helps me, because what it does is it tells more NFL and Giants fans out there what we are doing and that they should join our community and be a part of it as well. This is my 10th season covering the Giants and the NFL for the New York Daily News. And I'm in the locker room every day with the Giants. I'm at every game, home and away. And this is a way to bring all of the news and knowledge and information and sourcing directly to you. So thank you all for being here. And I'll get to all these questions in a second. Like I said, if you purchase a super chat or super sticker, I'll get to that immediately. The second thing is Joe Shane's job security. I think that, Ian O'Connor from The Athletic put out a tweet yesterday that I agree with. He said that even though there is a likelihood or a chance that Joe Shane stays, that it's not definite, and that it's essentially an issue that is going to be revisited and decided upon in a final way for 2026 after the season. So I think that those of you who, like me, believe that Dable's firing should only be the beginning and is not sufficient to completely turn this over, I think you should keep your eyes and ears open and your hope open to the fact that the Giants organization right now is evaluating everything. Now, my understanding is this entire coaching staff that you're going to see finishing the regular season is out at the end of the season, with the exception potentially of Mike Kafka. Mike Kafka, the interim head coach, I do believe has a runway here to prove that he deserves the full time job. And certainly from a lens of looking at Jackson Dart, consistency and stability for Jackson Dart is something you want. So if that means the same play caller stays, that is a feather potentially in Mike Kafka's cap to return either as next head coach or to remain as Jackson Dart's offensive coordinator. But as far as the coaching search goes, it'll be interesting to see where they go from there. And let's get to some of our questions now. I'm sure you guys are talking about that. Um, yeah, we broke the news first. Scorpio Ryan says, any news on Jackson? I know he's still in the protocol and not expected to play this week. Um, that was a really concerning mishandling of that injury. Tiger says starting Winston. Wow, yep. Did they start looking for candidates yet, Pat, says George Lewis. Definitely Joe Shane already in charge of canvassing that. A lot of coaches right now, obviously in the dead middle of their seasons, game planning, all of that stuff. So this is not an interview process at the moment. You know, people like Antonio Pierce that have been brought up who aren't coaching right now, those guys probably jump to the front of the line when it comes to getting an interview, and being heard from or canvassing that when it comes to being the Giants and Joe Shane and putting out those feelers. But I definitely think one takeaway I have from the Giants coaching search and their plans immediately is I do think they're going to look for and prioritize. Well, they need somebody who's going to be a leader of the team. They know that. They also know they want to do right by Jackson Dart, but they do need somebody to lead the team, to be a leader, to be somebody who is a leader of men, to be somebody who knows how to win a game, coach situational football, and not be on your heels and every week acting like you haven't prepared for the key moments, right? They need somebody, and so usually what that means is a former head coach, somebody with experience. So Mike McCarthy, John Gruden, those guys fall into that category. Matt Nagy technically falls into that category too, as well as with some offensive acumen. Probably a good chance he ends up being the Titans guy when all is said and done. But he definitely falls into the category we're talking about right now as former head coaches and leaders of men. That category, though, is not as strong as you would like it to be right now. Now, obviously, if you're throwing in all the head coaches out there, Bill Belichick, Robert Saleh, guys like that. But I also think, in addition to looking and maybe even prioritizing a former head coach, former NFL head coach, I think that the some of the coordinator names that really stick out, Lou Anarumo from Indianapolis, as I told you guys first in the Daily News and on Talking Ball Live the other night. Lou Anarumo, a lot of reasons why he adds up to at least most likely being a finalist for this job, because of his relationship with Joe Shane, his success as a coach, as a coordinator with the Cincinnati Bengals, and now with the Indianapolis Colts. A Staten Island guy who grew up as a Giants fan. His son works for Shane in the scouting department as a pro scout, and just a lot of connections and ties between Anarumo and this Giants team. He was the secondary coach, the DB's coach under James Betcher, defensive coordinator, and Pat Shermer, head coach, going back to what was that, 2018, I think. And so, a lot of reasons why he will be a finalist. He also interviewed for the job before Dable got it in 2022. So he's one to look for, but also some offensive minds. Clint Kubiak from Seattle. I do think he's going to be a guy who's going to be seriously in the running. Um, Arthur Smith from the Pittsburgh Steelers, somebody whose name keeps coming up and being whispered into my ear to pay closer attention to. And that's a former head coach who also calls plays and has experience. So, those are two names on the offensive side of the ball to consider. Anarumo, as I mentioned. I do think Wink Martindale deserves a shot. You know, I don't think I'd be optimistic necessarily in a Shane Martindale marriage happening, but I will say that if Shane were smart, he would understand, as plenty of other people do in the Giants building, that what Martindale did for them in 2022 was help them close and finish games. And his experience, they benefited from and went to the playoffs, and now have only won 5 of 27 games since he resigned, and went to Michigan. So I do think he deserves to be in the running as well. So Jimmy says, Pat, do you think Dable will miss you? Seems like you weren't his favorite. I don't think, none of this is personal, Jimmy. I mean, do I think he will miss me? No, I mean, I don't believe so. I think there's a lot of other relationships he has that are more important than the daily banter with people like me and the media here. But um, I think I don't think Dable. It's like, oh, Pat Leonard's not my favorite. I think it's more like Dable was very intent on trying to give as little as possible, trying to sound and be like a Bill Belichick disciple. He obviously flip flopped around in how he handled press conferences at different times, whether he was being tight lipped and saying nothing, or suddenly all of a sudden when his job was getting more on the hot seat. He started doing like rambling previews of the opponent out of nowhere. But I think it's more like I think he has an overall sense of standing at the podium in front of the camera where he's trying to give as little as possible. And he does view giving, let's say, who our kicker is going to be this week on Wednesday. He views those as like giving away a competitive advantage to other teams. And so it's not just me, it's more like what he says he knows other teams are watching, and he's worried that, oh, this coach is going to see this and then they're going to adjust and it's going to give them a competitive advantage against us. But obviously that's silly. Like the real people who know how to do this and succeed, it's not about those things are not the competitive advantage. Go out on the field on Sunday and coach and play hard and beat the other team. You know, that's overthinking it. Thank you for the super chat, Jimmy. John says, does Kafka have power to fire Bowen? As much as Dable deserved to get fired, Bowen still being employed is crazy. One of the final plays, he rushed three again. So my understanding is that this staff is done at the end of the year, like I said, with the exception of Kafka. Shane is somebody who, uh, let's put it this way. I think if they had confidence in somebody else calling the defense other than him, then they would fire him. But I don't view them as having confidence in anybody else to take that over. I think what they're trying to do right now as an organization is listen, they said enough is enough with Brian Dable and enough is enough with this current version of the team. But they have 7 games left, right? This is very early. Like John Mara and the Giants don't like to fire coaches this early in a season. Like the mid-season firing of Ben McAdoo and Jerry Reese really was only about, Eli Manning's benching for Geno Smith and the public backlash. If that benching hadn't happened there and, like extenuating circumstances typically happen for people to get fired in the middle of the season with the Giants as far as a head coach goes. So it's unusual for the Giants to do that early, but that's why, they're not ripping everything off. Like they still have to play 7 games. And so even though the defense has been disappointing, they're identifying that the head coach's lack of leadership and ability to create a cohesive plan to win and finish was the main problem. And they also know that this is a lame duck staff, like I said, with the potential exception of Kafka. But this is a lame duck staff, and the players know that. So, we may not see better effort. We may see this continue to fall and slip slide away. But I think the Giants' hope and their intention is to try to have this look a little bit more competitive and respectable. And tearing away too many coaches and coordinators puts you at a point where you have a game in 4 or 5 days, whatever it is, and then the voice over the headset to the middle linebacker is somebody that you're not familiar with. You haven't really done that together much. Like it's just it's risking more as far as the product you're putting on the field for your paying fans. But thank you for that. Thank you for that super chat, John. That was John. We got, I get you can't fire the owners and executives, but if this team is in this state under a fourth head coach and third GM, including Reese, what has to happen for them to start looking in the mirror? So, Very Gooster, thank you for the super chat. If that just froze on you, that was just a phone call coming in. He says, I get you can't fire the owners and executives, but if this team is in this state under a fourth head coach and third GM, including Reese, what has to happen for them to start looking in the mirror? So, Very Gooster, I think that the Giants ownership situation and what they ultimately decide when they sit in a room at the end of the season will really dictate what you're talking about as far as how this organization operates. I think big picture wise, the Giants would do well to blow out their building. Like when they fired everybody after the Judge Gettleman regime, there were some departments in their building that were left largely or mostly untouched, right? The training room is up there, public relations is up there, and there's a lot of people in the Giants building. There's some people who walk around the Giants building who are here every day that people don't know even what they do. And so I think it takes from a big picture lens, very Gooster, I think there's too many people like, and you could ask people who work there now or people who have worked here in the past about this dynamic. There's too many people who aren't the decision makers, who have a say so, who are, you know, behind the scenes, um, influencing bigger decisions or have their have the ear of an owner or someone in an ownership family or have an ear of a general manager or a coach at a certain level that don't deserve to be in the room when it comes to making those decisions, but who are influencing some of the people in that room. And so, every business has issues like that to some extent when it comes to like office politics and things like that. And the Giants aren't the only organization like that. But very Gooster, I think first, again, like I said, thank you for the big time super chat there. I think that it starts with a full turnover in that regard and a real autopsy of the full organization and not just um like, hey, let's fire the head coach again. Like you said, these are half measures. Just firing the head coach, leaving the GM, not something that typically works, not something that has worked for the Giants. We got another super chat in the queue. John says, John says, if John Mara does really hear the public, is it being are they being selective regarding Shane? 95% of the fan base and public agree Shane should be fired as well. Like I said, John, I think that the Giants do hear that, and I do think that Shane is not 100% on solid ground. So I do think that that's the case, that they are reevaluating it, and that at the end of the season, there is going to be a full evaluation and more so than what we saw released the other day. Now, that does not fully explain why the organization, right? Like they didn't have to say Joe Shane is remaining as general manager and he's going to lead the search. That felt a lot like them saying, this guy's being fired. This guy is not. We still believe in him, especially with the quote about the young nucleus that they like on the roster. So I think that it's, first of all, yes, there are more feelings. There are more positive feelings from the Giants ownership level about Joe Shane than there were about Brian Dable. That's true. So that is partially why we see the ourselves now with Dable already fired when Shane is still here. But it's also, remember last year when push came to shove and they were 3-14 at the end of the season, and I first reported this as well. Brian Dable and Joe Shane, their relationship frayed because it became clear to Dayball that not everybody was on the same side. Like first, it went from collaborative to, oh wait, I can see that I'm going to be made to walk the plank here, and Joe Shane is going to stay back on the ship with ownership. So, but I do think there's a chance he's still out, and I don't think the Giants don't hear the fans, if that makes sense. All right, let's see what other super chats we got in here. No more super chats, so I'm going to go back into the queue. If you drop a super chat, I'll answer your next question first. Okay. Oh, another one. Joel, what's up? Good to see you. Pat, can you explain the whole Dart not being evaluated for concussion after he came back on the field? Stuff like this can't happen. Do you expect more fines? I'm interested to see if they do open an investigation or a joint review between the NFL and NFLPA because I reached out to some sources yesterday and they said that as of that time they were not investigating that as a joint review. There was no further investigation planned or happening at that point. But I think it's obvious that it needs to, right? Like it wasn't as obvious as the Tua Tagovailoa fencing posture that cost an NFL concussion spotter their job or an independent neurological consultant their job a few years ago. But this was pretty obvious in the moment that something was wrong. Like live, and I was not the only one, looking at the play, what didn't add up about the play was that when the ball popped out and he fumbled, Dart did not reach out for the ball. In fact, at first, I was wondering if the ball had fallen right back in Dart's hands because he didn't reach out and his hands were tucked in. And then when you see the obvious angle and replay from the sideline and from the back, you can see that he's not moving. He's motionless and he slammed his head on the ground when the Bears defensive lineman hit him in the back, chasing him downfield. So, Joel, it's as Chris Nowinski from the Concussion Legacy Foundation said to me, that's a failure of the concussion protocol. That's a failure of the concussion protocol as it's written by the organization, or sorry, by the organization and the NFL, and the NFL employees and personnel in the stands. And it really is a damning looking photo. Like I can't put myself in his shoes. I know exactly, but that photo I posted on social media is of Brian Dable standing pretty close to the play on the sideline, staring right at it with Dart lying on the field. All the players obviously saw something was wrong. He started getting up actually on his elbows and knees. Another example or sign that something was likely wrong. So it's a failure of the process, is what it was. Thank you for that super chat, Joel. All right, let's get back into the queue here. Like I said, any super chats, I'll get to that next. Otherwise, I'll stay in the queue. Um, Deb says, glad to hear Wilson won't be playing. Not sure I want to start. He has to be taught to avoid the hits. He has to learn. Tiger Metal Stack agrees sit Dart for the next 5 weeks. Why don't the Giants just cut Russell Wilson? Stanley said, well, they paid him a good amount of money, and Joe Shane um, wanted Russell Wilson and thought he was going to be a lot better than he was. So as you see, he hasn't cut Evan Neal, looks like. So imagine him deciding cutting Russell Wilson. If the Giants have 5 or less wins next year, will Shane be back, or are they just going to fire him then and stick it out? Goldie said. I think you mean this year, Goldie. Yeah, I think that's another way that the decision could be made for Shane, is if they finish with like 2, 3, 4 wins, like which looks like is what's going to happen. So that's a good point, Goldie. That could make the decision for them, while if there is a debate happening ownership wide and after the season in January, that could end up making the decision for them. That's a good point. Jay Seward says, when does Kafka speak, and will we hear from Joe Shane? Kafka speaks in about an hour, and Joe Shane typically talks at the bye week. It was disappointing that nobody from the organization spoke on the record on Monday. Feel like that should have been Joe Shane or somebody from ownership. I'm assuming Dart is not allowed to speak to the media during this process. Right, Joshua. When you're in the concussion protocol, you're not allowed to speak. So I could see him in the locker room today, potentially, but I'm not allowed to speak to him. Do you think the Giants will hire Ole Miss offense coordinator Charlie Weiss Jr. since he worked with Jackson Dart? I don't know. Haven't heard that. Very says, I don't know how you look at being 2-8 third year in a row and somehow think it's not also on the general manager. Totally agree. Roman says, do you ever feel like you're losing your mind covering the Giants? All the time, Romans. But when weeks like this happen, I recognize that there is some sanity in the world after all. What do you think about Matt LaFleur? Do you think he could be fired? Michael said. That kind of come out of nowhere recently, Michael. My view of that is Jeff Hapley seems to be a very popular coach and has gotten a lot of good press with running that defense. And so I don't know. I do know one thing. If you guys listen to John Middlecoff, who has a great podcast on the Volume, John Middlecoff has been saying all season that with Mark Murphy out and new leadership with the Packers, he feels like LaFleur is under much more pressure. And he's been saying this since the start of the season, that if they don't get results this year with new leadership there, he could see a change happening in Green Bay. So credit Middlecoff if that ends up happening. And I don't know. I mean, as far as Giants head coach, I mean, definitely he becomes a candidate if that happens. I I don't think of Matt LaFleur when I think of obvious, excellent former head coach with experience who closes games, but his record speaks for itself. Off the top of my head, we were looking it up the other day. He has something like a 670 or 650 or something like that winning percentage. So, yeah, when you're the Giants, if a coach like that comes available, you definitely turn over every stone. Deb, what's up? Deb says, "Love the show, Pat. I respect your straight talk regarding the Giants. No sugarcoating." Thank you, Deb. And we'll do that. We do this about the whole NFL too. There's just a lot of Giants going on, and obviously for the daily news, I'm also at the Giants building every day, so we do a lot of Giants. But NFL wide questions are welcome too, as Michael just said, and so I can give you my best opinion and knowledge of that. And so there are coaches in there at some organizations where you don't think that they would lose their job, but some of these organizations who have been operating recently with higher standards than the Giants, you know, because they have higher standards or higher expectations, you can get fired for less. So, like John Harbaugh with the Ravens, if they go one and done in the playoffs, did they miss the playoffs? Yeah, sure, he could be out. Mike Tomlin's name has been popping up last several years. Matt LaFleur coming up now, so that's why that happens. A lot of you don't love Arthur Smith. I see. JB wants Antonio Pierce as interim. Barry Gooster likes Clint Kubiak. Obed says Antonio Pierce not a head coach. Dope Boy says he would like him as defensive coordinator. John says no more offensive minded coaches. The Giants need to get back to our old glory and get this defense clicking. Um, Obed says, can we stop with the Giants ties stuff? Yeah, no, Obed, I hear you there. Especially like I have a ton of respect for Steve Spagnuolo, and I understand his and Antonio Pierce's connections to the Giants, strong connections to the Giants. But those names coming out so quickly as top candidates, like, do I think they get interviews? Yeah. But do I consider them real candidates to be the next head coach of the Giants? I'm not there. Steven says if we get a defensive minded head coach, I'd like to see Pierce as DC, then hope to add a Mike McDaniel as OC. How can you say he isn't a good coach when he hasn't even been given a real shot as a DC or a head coach, says Oldie. Or Goldie, sorry. Jacob says smack that like button and that sub button for the best reporter in the business. Thank you, Jacob. I appreciate you. Jacob says any chance Shea Tierney stays with the team as a coach? I doubt it. He's a Brian Dable guy through and through. I'm surprised he's still here. Joel says we seem to fumble everything in all aspects of the organization. CJ said, did Dart lose a tooth? It looked like it based on that one post I saw on, I think it was Instagram. Somebody pulled that. Look, I'm going to try to find that out today if I see him. Yeah, sorry about those phone calls interrupting us at times. Jacob says, answer the phone call. We need rumors. Yeah, it might be time to get two phones, guys. I'm not a two phone guy. I've always been a one phone guy, but it might be time. Karen says, unfortunately, there's no respect for the coaching staff of the team to do their best. How is that possible? Yeah, I know. Why did Shane sign another kicker? Great question. If I remember correctly, Koo didn't miss any field goals versus the Bears. No idea, John. I guess that might be like looking at this roster through a developmental lens. Like that might be Joe Shane saying, like building up a practice squad for the end of the year that he can walk in and see. See, I'm trying to fix this issue that's been hurting us for the last several years, even though he's the one who did it. Right? We're all wondering who did this, right, Joe Shane? Yes, it is time to revamp the training and medical staff. They're some of the people that I was mentioning. Too much influence and too many voices in the room when they're not supposed to be. John says, I agree. Feel like we're the only organization that takes forever for players to get back healthy. Very Gooster says, thank you. Thank you, Very Gooster. 1925 Giants Drive needs a deep cleaning. They've been trashed since the end of Eli's run. It's a damn dumpster fire. Flip it completely upside down, says Stoney. Let's see. Hackensack disposal sanitation needs to come through that dump swamp, says SK. John says John Mara needs to take a look at the Knicks and Jim Dolan. He finally let Leon Rose take over operations and look at the Knicks. Mara needs to step down. Let me say this. We say this every video and live we do now, but really best wishes and thoughts for John Mara and his health. Very concerning that he's battling something so serious in cancer, and hoping for the best for him. Let's see. There was a picture of Dart apparently missing a tooth. Yeah, no, it looked like he may. There were two plays in that game, including the one I think you're talking about, where he slammed his head. On that other one, the Bears linebacker Noah Sewell actually got flagged for a personal foul for hitting him in the head, and his helmet came off, and there was no concussion spotter, no removal of Dart from the field. Like, I don't know what was going on at Soldier Field. The fact they hid Shane in that press release and him coming back tells you that they know the fan base hates Shane. Yes, it does. 100% Goldie. Yes, it does. That was not by accident. Stoney says Dart is going to look completely different now, in my opinion. Why? He's so good out of structure. All of his best plays are out of structure. Let's be real. Shane missed on Neal and Kayvon. Other players from Kayvon's class have outperformed him by a mile, says John. SK says the firing presser was signed by the owners, so that means Joe wasn't allowed, or owners are babying him. Ferry Gooster says starting to feel like Kayvon isn't beating the disappointment allegations. SK says, which makes no sense based on Hard Knocks. If so, Mara is the biggest hypocrite. We saw the speech last year. Caleb put him on skates all game, John says of Thibodeau. Kayvon alone had 5 chances at him. If that was OC, Kiwi, JPP, or Strahan, there would have been 5 sacks. Yes, a lot of phone calls, busy week, as you can imagine, Sean. Um, if people think Dable's pressers are bad, avoiding questions, Joe Schmo is worse. No accountability, says John. I mean, in the past, it was like, um, you know, remember the Kadarius Tony stuff? Joe was basically trying to embarrass me in press conferences when I had the information dead right. Let me see. With Mara undergoing treatment, is he going to have the energy to conduct a GM search? What's it going to take to motivate ownership to move on from Shane? Are his feelings hurt because his head coach is gone and Shane? I think ownership between the family, the Mara family, and now the Koch family, like this will be a professional coaching search. The question, though, Francis, that you mentioned is a valid one, which is who will ultimately be the principals in it, making the final decision. But I think the Mara family, with John still running the show, because he really was the one here, along with Steve Tisch, who pulled the plug on Brian Dable, um, the Brian Dable's regime. That's not a non-factor, Francis, for sure. But the Maras are obviously getting a head start on this coaching search and are going to reevaluate Shane at the end of the year as well. Francis says, thanks for your reporting. You got it. Thank you for being here. Let's see. Very says, you said 10th season, so you've only seen the 2016 and 22 playoff runs as a reporter? Sheesh. I know. You're telling me, Very. What do I think of Mike McCarthy? I think that Oh, interesting. So somebody posing as Pat Hanlon says, "What do you think of McCarthy? I think the Giants need a bridge coach to raise the floor of this organization, break stability." Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I might have said that on our last Talking Ball Live on Monday night, but I totally agree that even though McCarthy leaves things lacking when it comes to game management, time management, things like that, he knows how to run a professional operation and he knows how to coach and get the most out of quarterbacks. So I do think that he needs to be high on the list. Dope boy, yes, there is a chance of bringing Wink back, but we'll see based on, is he a head coaching candidate who gets an interview? Does he end up returning as DC, depending on certain people who get hired? Um, all of that. Oh, John, I missed your super chat here. Sorry about that. I missed it. John said, when Shane does his annual bye-week presser, can you, Art, Jordan, and company press him with accountability questions? Sick of his no accountability answers. You got it, John. Let's see. SK says, how many times do you want to clean house? I'm just saying they haven't fully cleaned it out when they say they have. That's what I'm saying. Um, let's see. Josh McCown, not sure he's head coach. Not sure he's head coach material yet, even though he is a rising star. Francis says, thank you. Greg says, smart move naming Jameis as starter. Way to stay on top of it, Pat. Is so sad for all of us. I can't wait to see how Winston does this weekend, says Karen. Bishop says, Winston is starting. Yes. So those of you who just social media here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, the handle is PL on NFL everywhere, as well as P Leonard NYDN on X. I first reported that Jameis Winston is being named the Giants starter for this weekend's game against the Green Bay Packers. We talked during this Talking Ball Live impromptu here on YouTube about whether it makes sense to start Jameis for the rest of the year and just let Jackson Dart sit and get healthy. We talked about candidates for head coach and where that's going, what their priorities are. So if you just missed some of that, take a look. But remember, as Jacob keeps telling you guys, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. So subscribe to our channel. It's PL on NFL on YouTube, Talking Ball with Pat Leonard. Remember to come post game after every Giants game to Talking Ball with Pat Leonard on YouTube. And we do live throughout the weeks. We've been off and on the Monday and Thursday night ones. Like I'm not going to do one on Thursday night, which is this week, which is part of the reason we're doing this one impromptu on Wednesday. But we did Monday night after we did a Sunday night one from Chicago at Soldier Field. And we've been keeping you up to date on where this is, right? I don't get everything right, but this season, I told you guys they were going to start 0-3 and bench Russ in week 4 for Dart. That hit. I told you Dable was going to get fired in after week 8. He got fired after week 10. Pretty close. And I think, and also, really, I told you guys that Jay needed to be named the starter, and Broken was named the starter. John says, all right, my early lunch break is over. Thanks for the vent session, Pat. Have a good one. Stay warm and healthy. You got it, John. Thank you for contributing and being here. Let me see. Got to protect its health and longevity, no doubt. Josh says, what do you think of Ronnie Barnes? Seems like he's highly regarded, but our players are constantly hurt. Is it more of what Ronnie is or isn't doing, or is it something else like the turf? No, I mean, Ronnie is well respected. You're absolutely right, but I do think that they need fresh blood in that room and in that building. Um, you want to trust the people in there, but also, again, when the doors close and you're making the decisions that impact the organization the most, it should be the head coach, general manager, and ownership, and that's it. And so that would be my answer to that. No press conference from Daboll. Wouldn't surprise me though if he ended up on somebody's podcast or doing an interview in that regard. Michael, great question to close us out. Do you think there will be airplanes about Joe Shane? Do you guys? I'm curious to see that because I believe there were some being scheduled for late in the season. I'm not sure if they're going to continue because Joe Shane is still on. I'll be interested to see if they do. Kafka presser is, I believe, in about an hour or so. So stay tuned for the latest. I'm going to record that and post the full presser here on the YouTube channel. You can get it here first. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you very much to all of you who purchased the super chats today. Um, we had the super chatters to shout you out. We had Jimmy, John, Very Gooster, John again, Joel Lopez, Deb Ellis, John a third time MVP. MVP. Thank you so much to you guys. Like I said, if you missed it, this will stay on the YouTube channel and you can listen to all of our information regarding Jameis Winston, the quarterback decision, and the head coaching search, and Joe Shane's efforts to keep his job and where that stands. Thanks for being here. Stick around on Talking Ball Live with Pat Leonard channel. And if you noticed, we have links to our Talking Ball merch store. Go to the Talking Ball merch store, get your winter hats, get your shirts, get your hoodies, get your pint glass, and support our sponsors: My Bookie, Hooks, Rubs, and Spices, Boom Chaga Mushroom Super Drink, and Sal Loretta for Men. Take care, guys. Talk soon.